In 1942, at World War II's peak, a British ocean liner, the RMS Nova Scotia, requisitioned for use as a troopship, set out into the Indian Ocean with a complement of male, civilian internees and Italian prisoners of war bound for Durban in South Africa, but during its voyage, the vessel would fall victim to the hunt of U-177 as it passed east of Natal province, leaving survivors to face a grueling 24-hour fight for survival, battling against turbulent waves, starvation, dehydration, and, worst of all, the gathering of a hungry audience. The RMS Nova Scotia's story begins in the mid-1920s, when, at the commission of the shipping line Furness Withy & Co., the vessel was delivered in 1926, alongside its sister ship RMS Newfoundland, from the Vickers Sons and Maxim Limited Company of Barrow-in-Furness, the liner's primary role being the operation of transatlantic routes between Liverpool and Boston via St. John's, Newfoundland, and Halifax, Nova Scotia. Among the many passengers who travelled aboard the vessel during its civilian career was a 17-year-old Roald Dahl, who sailed with the Nova Scotia during August 1934 to Newfoundland as part of a public schools exploring society expedition, Dahl later going on to become the famous novelist, short story writer and poet behind such classic works of literature as James and the Giant Peach, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and Matilda. With the outbreak of World War II in September 1939, the RMS Nova Scotia initially remained in civilian service, sailing on September 21st to St. John's with passengers including the final 29 children to leave Britain for Canada under the Children's Overseas Reception Board or CORB evacuation scheme, the CORB being discontinued a year later following the sinking of the SS City of Benares by German U-boat U-48, resulting in the deaths of 260 people, 77 whom were evacuated children. In early 1941, the liner was requisitioned by the Ministry of War Transport for use as a troopship, and on February 3rd of the same year, sailed in convoy from Britain to Freetown in Sierra Leone, and then onward to Cape Town in South Africa, before heading north through the Mozambique Channel and arriving at Port Tewfik in Egypt, its complement of 1,200 soldiers being deployed against the notorious Afrika Korps of Field Marshal Erwin Rommel. Meanwhile, as the RMS Nova Scotia was in Egypt, German Type 9 D2 U-boat U-177, which had only been commissioned in March 1942, departed Kiel on its first patrol of duty on September 17th of that year under the command of Kriegsmarine Kapitän Lieutenant Robert Giese, a seasoned U-boat commander who had previously seen deployment aboard U-98, having undertaken 6 patrols in the North Atlantic and had sunk 11 vessels, including 10 merchant ships and Royal Navy armed merchant cruiser HMS Salopian. Venturing out into the Atlantic, the U-177 sank 2 British and a Greek merchant ship before entering the Indian Ocean via the Cape of Good Hope, damaging merchant ship Serion off the coast of South Africa, and then sinking 2 further vessels as it took up position east of Durban at the southern end of the Mozambique Channel, a vital passage between continental Africa and the island of Madagascar, through which travelled a majority of East African shipping traffic. In the aftermath of Japan's entry into the war and the increase of Allied shipping across the Indian Ocean to halt their advance through Southeast Asia, 4 Type 9 U-boats were initially deployed off the southeastern coast of South Africa to intercept enemy vessels passing through the Mozambique Channel during August 1942, followed in September by the addition of 4 more U-boats to the area, including U-177, this attack squadron of U-boats being dubbed the Polar Bear Group. RMS Nova Scotia, by this point, was being prepared to set sail from Massawa in British Eritrea back to Durban, its complement this time comprising 3,000 bags of mail, 134 South African guards, 750 Italian prisoners of war, and 15 civilian internees, the policy of the British Armed Forces during the North Africa campaign, being to transfer captured enemy units to internment camps in South Africa, with around 93,000 Axis troops undertaking the journey, 4,000 of whom were Italian. Setting out from Massawa in October 1942, under the command of 51-year-old Master Alfred Hender, the Nova Scotia was unaware that 8 U-boats were now prowling the waters of the Mozambique Channel, and on the morning of November 28th, approximately 40 miles east of St. Lucia in the Natal province, U-177 sighted the liner approaching from the north, unescorted and completely vulnerable to the submarine's wrath. Moving to attack, Giese ordered 3 torpedoes launched into the Nova Scotia's port side, and at 07:15 a.m. each one pounded the ship's hull with massive force, rupturing its oil bunkers and sparking an inferno that set both the vessel and the water alight, while all of the ship's port-side lifeboats were shattered by the blast. Rapidly, the Nova Scotia filled with water and was dragged down by the bow, all while the 1,052 people aboard struggled to contain the fire and prepared to launch what few remaining lifeboats could be salvaged, the crew only being able to lower one of the starboard boats before the liner took its final plunge to the ocean floor, the ship having taken only 8 minutes to founder, and while little is known as to the number who had died in the initial blast, fire and sinking, hundreds are known to have ended up in the water, many drowning or choking as their heavy oil-smothered clothes were dragged under within the first few minutes and hours. Aboard the U-177, Captain Lieutenant Guizet was reluctant to leave so many stranded men to their fate, especially after pulling a few of the survivors aboard and finding that they were captured Italian soldiers. But under the strict Laconia Order, which had been drafted in September 1942 after U-boats attempting to rescue survivors of the RMS Laconia came under attack from American aircraft, he was forbidden from pulling any of the living aboard his ship, Guizet choosing to consult with the Befehlshaber der U-Boot, or BDU, command in Berlin over the radio for options. In line with the Laconia Order, the BDU maintained that Guizet should continue his patrol, and thus U-177 departed the scene in order to resume its hunt, while Berlin contacted the authorities of neutral Portugal to inform them of the Nova Scotia's destruction and that there were survivors in the water, Portugal being the colonial power of Mozambique at the time, and therefore the nearest non-adjutant nation that could send help. But despite the Portuguese Navy dispatching the frigate NRP Alfonso de Albuquerque from Lourenço Marques, it would take 14 hours for the ship to arrive, during which time those still alive would be forced to endure the frigid, churning waters of the southern Indian Ocean, as beneath the waves gathered the forces of nature in the form of dozens of Oceanic Whitetip sharks. Throughout the day and into the night, those who could clung on to what wreckage remained of the Nova Scotia as the current carried them south, the silence of the vast ocean being punctuated on occasion by the mauling of survivors as sharks moved in to pull them under, the 6 to 7 foot creatures attracted by the blood in the water as the injured were left untended, first preying on the dead before moving on to lone stragglers who floated away from the small clusters of men left hanging on what was once their ship. By the following morning, the number of corpses that could be used to feed the sharks had dwindled, and they became more ferocious, choosing to attack the groups of men directly, and having been in the water for nearly 24 hours, the Whitetips made quick work of the weaker survivors, pulling them away before dragging them to the depths, those who had been able to retain their strength kicking and splashing to drive off the predators. Eventually, the Alfonso de Albuquerque arrived at around mid-morning, greeted by a grotesque scene of absolute carnage as the frigate was surrounded by bodies and strewn debris, plucking from the water only 130 Italian internees, 42 guards, and 17 crew members from the blood-stained ocean, an attack which had claimed the lives of 858 people, including 650 Italians, 96 crew members, 88 South African guards, 10 DEMS gunners, 8 military and naval personnel, 5 passengers, and the ship's master Alfred Hender. Away from the main cluster of survivors, 2 further survivors were able to avoid the sharks and reach safety, one being picked up after 3 days in the water by a British cruiser, while the other, an Italian prisoner drifting on a life raft, was carried on the wayward currents of the ocean for a fortnight, before coming ashore at Tunzini in Natal. Although surpassed by the later sinking of the USS Indianapolis in July 1945, the destruction of the RMS Nova Scotia has gone down in history as among the worst shark attacks ever to take place, as while there is no official count as to how many of the survivors were killed by the Whitetips, the testimony of those who were eventually rescued, together with initial observations by the crew of U-177 as to those who had initially lived through the sinking, against the dwindling number pulled alive from the water by the Alfonso de Albuquerque, definitely puts the number between a few dozen and up to 100. For weeks afterwards, human remains washed up on the shores of Natal and Mozambique, while U-177 continued to stalk the Indian Ocean, sinking 4 other vessels during its 1942 tour before returning to Bordeaux in January of the following year, undertaking a second patrol to South Africa during mid-1943, once again under the command of Captain Lieutenant Guizet, during which 6 further vessels fell victim to the U-boat, although on its third tour, the U-177's luck ran out when, on February 6, 1944, the ship was spotted west of Ascension Island while en route to South Africa, and was subsequently sunk by depth charges dropped by a US Navy P-4BY-1 Liberator bomber, killing 50 of the ship's 65 crew, although Captain Lieutenant Guizet would not be present at the destruction of the vessel as he had been transferred to the 25th U-boat flotilla, a training flotilla based at Gotenhafen, in January 1944, and would continue to be a serving officer of the German Navy even after the war's end, before retiring at the rank of Flotillan Admiral in 1970, passing away at the age of 76 on April 26, 1989. Today, the sinking of the RMS Nova Scotia has largely been forgotten in the wake of more notable incidents of shark attacks, as per the aforementioned USS Indianapolis, but in spite of the event's obscurity, the destruction of the ship and subsequent fight for survival by its crew and complement should be remembered as one of the worst instances where the sinking of the vessel itself was merely the beginning of a far more terrifying ordeal.